Hi, I'm Rachel Hanrahan. Today we're interviewing Raym, the shaman and creator of crystal dreaming. What is a shaman? Traditionally, we understood a shaman as a bridger between the two worlds, someone that takes another on a journey between the realms, connecting, bridging the worlds. Well, welcome, Raym. Thank you for being here today. So, Raym, how did it all come to be? How did you find yourself walking this path?
Okay, so up to the age of about 42, I was a successful visual and performance artist. I was enjoying life to the full, a little bit hedonistic, had a good stable family life, and I had reached a kind of a plateau in my career as a performer where the big group that I was working with, Primary Source, had splintered into smaller groups. And so I was at a point of surrender in terms of, okay, what's going to happen next? Didn't know what was going to happen next. And I was at a friend's dinner party and I picked up what I thought was a fishing float, and it was actually a green obsidian ball. The ball opened up into a tunnel of light inside the ball, which I found incredible because I wasn't expecting it. And being a kind of adventurous type of chap, I went down the tunnel of light to see what would happen, and I was met with waves of unconditional love and joy, and was kind of basically told, it's great you've woken up, you've been asleep at the wheel a bit. And I was like, you guys are talking to the wrong person, I don't believe in you. But the intensity of the experience was so profound, I couldn't deny it. So I was in a dinner party holding a green obsidian ball, bawling my eyes out while my friends were having dinner, wondering what was going on.
Wow.
And when I looked up at them, I could see their energy bodies, but most particularly I could see a pink light emanating from the center of my wife's chest towards me, which was profound. And so that triggered a spontaneous spiritual awakening, which might be described as a Kundalini experience by some. Fortunately, nothing blocked it. There was no trauma or any kind of, I wasn't holding anything that would block it. So it happened very deeply and quickly, and just turned my life upside down completely from that moment onwards. My life transformed from being a hedonistic artist to being a shaman in minutes, although I didn't really understand what a shaman was, and I actually didn't really understand what was happening to me. So I was fully supported by my family, and then started to explore what I could do with this new sensitivity, which was overwhelming at the time. I had to remove myself from society. I was hypersensitive. I could read people's energy fields, their stories, their histories, their past life stories without particularly wanting to.
Yes.
And then very quickly people started coming to my house, knocking at the door saying, I want what you've got, randomly. And I want what you've got, give me a reading. And I didn't know what a reading was. I didn't know what a session was. I mean, prior to that, I thought anyone who was into this kind of work was quite weak-willed and light in the head. So here we go. Many years later, 28, 30 years later, I'm here now as I guess, an established 21st century shaman.
How did you take that initiation, that kind of spiritual awakening into the crystal dreaming modality? How did it transform into the shape that it takes today?
Random people were coming to my house asking to have the same experience as me, because in the community word got out that I was switched on, open, whatever term you might use, awakened, and very raw. Then one day a friend of a friend came, and I had acquired a green obsidian sphere by then. So I had read that you do not let people touch your crystals. And she was really wanting to understand. So I said, look, take it, hold it. You try, hold it in this position, move it up and down. And nothing was working. So I stepped forward and touched the the obsidian sphere and her hand in holding it in the correct position, and I now know, didn't at the time, but she dropped into a deep trance immediately.
Right.
She fell backwards and her eyes rolled up and started flickering. So I let go in case she fell over. And she was like, what happened then? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Why don't we go into the private room and explore? So in that situation, then I was able to perceive all the traumas that she needed to release, feel them as she released them through me into the sphere, into my solar plexus and out of my crown.
Wow.
And over the following months, I had people who are gifted with the sight have a look at it, and what they said was they saw a muddy energy enter my body and leave as golden clear energy. So I was transmuting all her trauma from over eons, but I was feeling it and seeing it. And it felt like I was being electrocuted and having buckets of cold water thrown over me at the same time.
That's intense.
I offered it to people because it was so profound for that person. I've been blessed with a really robust physical body.
Physical reaction. Doing that.
I have my gene pools, thanks to my ancestors, really. I was smart enough to figure out that wouldn't suit everyone. What I was going through was not pleasant.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, how can I share this? I'm not sure. And I kind of reached a bit of an impasse. And I was looking for a teacher because my teachers were non-physical, which was challenging for me, as very much like a step back from my spiritual team who'd say, just experience, you know what you're doing. That was the message I was getting. And I was like, I don't really understand what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I was concerned, my mind was concerned that I might hurt somebody in doing this technique because I had no process, I had no form. It just happened, and it worked. People left feeling sensational.
Yeah, amazing.
So I thought I needed to find a teacher, but I couldn't find anyone, even in Byron Bay. It was all too fluffy for me. It was all too new age, rose quartz, fairies, bless them, angels, bless them. But you know what I mean? It wasn't me.
Absolutely.
And then finally a guy came through town and I went to his talk and he had some big crystals in the room laid out in sacred geometry, and I really liked where he was at. And had a chat with him. And he ran 3 levels of course. And so I read through and I said, really, I'd like to do level 3. And he said, I don't know whether that's possible. And then I told him what I was doing with the green obsidian. He said, oh, you're doing exorcisms with the green obsidian. You can do the advanced course.
That's straight to level 3?
Straight to level 3. And I did his course. It was well, I was confused on the first day. I rocked up expecting lots of crystals, and all the guy talked about was Atlantis and Native Americans, and I was like, what am I doing here? Respectfully sat through. But the next day, there was an array of crystals, and he said, okay, pick some crystals, lay them out on the ground, and each person's going to lie in them. You're paired up, and you'll talk to your partner. So I picked up the crystals, and really that was where the crystal dreaming mandala started, and in its fullest form, it's been modified. It's been fine-tuned since, but basically the mandala that we all use happened then.
Right.
And for me, putting the crystals out was really like hanging tools on a tool shed wall. It was like the positions were fluorescing for me on the ground.
That's amazing. I love that.
It's really clear. No thought involved at all. And it's unusual because the mandala stretches for over 1 meter and it's all around the head. I had read up on crystal mandalas and they were mostly big around the body.
Yeah.
And it was not so much a thing as to point the points to the middle of the head. That was avoided, or points that would end up going through the heart to the head. Well, that's exactly what I did.
Right.
And I've kind of then facilitated my first crystal dreaming session in the form it takes now, where I asked the person to look down at their body and tell me what they saw. And they did the same for me. And what I saw was a clear body, but instead of eyes, I had the cosmos, I had the universe, stars in my eyes. And I could hear the instructor telling them what to say, you know, would you like to go into that space? So I went through my eyes into the cosmos and straight to my soul star, which of course was beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was my first receiving of
The magic of crystal dreaming.
The magic of crystal dreaming. So yeah, that's how it all started. Well, at the end of the course, he said, I've learned so much today to be in the presence of a living crystal master. And I really was like, which one is it? You know, I didn't get it. And he said, Raym, thank you, you taught me so much. Don't study with anyone else, just do it. And that's exactly what I needed to hear. Like, I'm okay, it's safe. I can't, even though I've got no formal training, I can't really hurt anyone. So then it just took off from there.
And what is your hope for crystal dreaming?
I'd love it to be like Reiki, or I'd love it to go global and be very well used. But I would love for the process, because it's so magical and so immediate, and it doesn't need a lot of training, actually. 3 days is hard to believe that you could learn the process quite quickly. You need to practice a lot. I think the challenge is it's a very deep process. So it takes time for practitioners to be confident, to really go deep with the client. Yeah, I'd love it to reach more people, to be more popular. But I also have to surrender to the organic nature of it. That's the way it happens. But yeah, my dream, which may happen after I've left the planet, is for this to be much more readily available, like in as many healing centers as possible. Because crystal dreaming cuts to the chase. It does not mess around. It's not fluffy or airy-fairy. It really goes there.
Yeah.
And in going there, it releases trauma, energies, entities that have been holding people back for eons. All the client has to do is surrender to the process. And the skill is in the facilitator, taking the client to a place of profound understanding without leading them.
Raym, how would you describe what's happening in the crystal dreaming? How are you actually going straight into the issue at hand? What's happening for people?
The process involves the client relying in a mandala of the crystals. That's the same for every client, because we're opening a particular avenue of consciousness, a portal of consciousness. So the mandala is set up to do that. It doesn't vary from client to client because the chakra system's the same. So lying in that mandala, for some people, they have they immediately drop into a trance without the facilitator saying anything. And the thing there for the facilitator is to keep them talking so we don't lose their consciousness. What the crystals are set up to do is to open avenues of consciousness that we have shut down, or our culture shuts down. That are not nurtured and recognized. They're present, but particularly in Western culture, we close it down. And that's a long story there about why we would do that, but we'll just accept that that's the way it is in Western culture.
Yes.
So laying in the mandala opens it, and the skill of the practitioner is to guide the client through the process into a space where they can manage that it's not overwhelming, it's not too fast. It's a safe space because the practitioner clears the space before every client, ensures the space is clear of anything that's not based on unconditional love. So what happens is the client will lay in the mandala, the practitioner will talk to the client, they'll lead them through a body scan. So the client will scan their body using all their senses. Most clients are able to perceive visually. You don't need to be able to do that. But what the scan is doing is revealing any blocked energy that they're holding in their body. Then the practitioner will invite the body to reveal what they're holding. And so we end up dealing a lot with trauma, past life trauma and past life death. And for a novice, the interesting thing is a novice kind of thinks that what the client will recall at death is terror and fear, which can happen, but really what we're looking for is the key emotion underneath that, or the overriding emotion about what happened when they died. So the body will hold the trauma in the same place physically as the trauma happened, but the body is not holding the physical trauma. The body is holding the emotional trauma, which in turn is affecting the body's performance, can affect the body's well-being, can affect the emotional body of the client. So once it's removed, things change dramatically for the client, sometimes physically, most often in their emotional body and their spiritual body. So when we connect with any trauma or any held energy, negative energy, or any entities, when we connect with that, the practitioners have the skill, the training to release it, and to release it joyfully, to release it in as pleasant a way as possible.
How would a crystal dreaming practitioner deal with negative energy that might arise in the session?
Okay, well, the most common form of negative energy is, the most common form we deal with is trauma relating to past life death, or a negative past life experience, or even a present life experience. And then next to that, the most common thing we would deal with is spirit attachment, which is a dead person that's attached to the client through trauma. Or through a past life agreement. And then there are more intense negative entities. Entities is a general term that would include an earthbound spirit. So what can happen with an earthbound spirit is that there is an agreement in a life that they will look out for each other. This, I'm talking now benign, basically benign earthbound spirit. And your client dies and everything's sweet, but for whatever reason, the person they made the agreement with remains attached to the agreement and does not transit home to light. So they become earthbound, a conscious entity. And when the client is born again, they find their signature, they find their being, and they reattach to them because they already have permission to be there. So that can be anything from a couple of soldiers in World War I who promised to look out for each other, and immediately one's killed, and your client comes and it's a lady who finds a dead World War I soldier attached to her saying, "Mate, we were mates and I'm still looking out for you." Or they could be lovers that had a suicide pact, and one transits home to light but the other one remains attached. Right. So that attachment, I mean, there's an endless list, really. Yeah. That attachment will affect your client's relationships with members of the family, loved ones, lovers, etc. Because the attached being really wants their love and attention, or their attached being has an earthbound agenda in terms of, you promised me this, you promised me you would always love me. So it's important to locate and release them as joyfully as we can. And most entities, a lot of them don't understand they're dead. So once they're made aware of the fact that they're dead, then we can help them transit home to light by calling on the beings that love them unconditionally. But then it can get more complicated if we're dealing with a self-aware entity that's not happy. A self-aware entity that's angry or fearful. And that's when an entity can make a client's body move or a client talk in a different way. And really the thing to understand about dealing with any angry being on any plane is that they're frightened. Anger is a manifestation of fear. So once we understand that, once we really understand it, we don't just say it. Once we understand that anger is a manifestation of fear, then we can dialogue with the entity and tell it not to be afraid, which, it may often respond with more anger, but with a little bit of patience, we can actually dialogue with an entity, any entity, including any kind of demonic attachment, any of that. They will all talk eventually. Wow. Most will take the opportunity to go home to light. And those who don't, we respect their decision.
Right.
They just may not come back to the client.
Okay, so they're just left to be on wherever they've chosen to be.
Wherever they chose to go. Because we must be mindful as practitioners not to get too involved, for our karma not to get too involved, and our judgment not to get too involved. What we can do is repeatedly create an opening for enlightenment, an opening for peace, for any beings that are attached to the client. But in the end, and it's pretty rare, we also must respect their choice not to take that opportunity, but we must ensure that all contracts and agreements between the client are dissolved and that they understand they can't return to the client without the client's conscious written permission.
So on some level, there needs to be an understanding that we are incarnating continually. There is this process of reincarnation, and perhaps even some entities aren't aware of that, and that could be why they kind of miss the opportunity.
Missed the opportunity millions of years ago sometime.
That foundational understanding that we are reincarnating.
For me, somebody who questions reincarnation is like, do you question that the sun will rise tomorrow? You know, it's as inevitable as that. And one day the sun won't, but right, you get my drift. It's like reincarnation is an immutable force. And as soon as you open your consciousness, whether you believe in it or not, it's right there. Because it becomes obvious where certain traumas happen. So one of the key things with crystal dreaming is understanding that the body will hold on to everything on a cellular level. It's integrated into your DNA, and your body will happily release that memory and enable you to re-experience it. So some sessions can be quite visceral, and that's good in a way for the client, because the client can't leave the session saying, I made up the fact that my leg was sawn off, when they actually felt it being sawn off in the session.
Undeniable, yeah.
Undeniable that was in 1800 as well, and not a movie that they saw or whatever. So, an important part of understanding how things work is to understand our body happily holds on to all experiences, and actually, interestingly, with a 360-degree vision. Not just what you might think you will remember. Your body holds on to everything that's going on around you, so you're able to perceive more maybe than you did at the time. But your body will happily release that memory into full consciousness if invited to do so.
Yeah, which is amazing.
It is amazing. It's that simple.
It's that simple, and it's just there. And of course, if we're not reincarnating, what are we doing? What is the purpose?
Well, I must say, prior to my spiritual awakening, I was like, you make art, you party, you die.
Life's a party, of course.
And that was fine. And, for anyone who's listening to this, who's in that mode, it's also fine, but there's a lot more to it if you care to explore it.
There's many paths to walk.
Yeah.
Why do we reincarnate, Raym?
I think it's a journey into understanding love, a journey into understanding the power of love, and a journey into embodying that. And that leads to a journey into enlightenment, where you can ground that. You can walk and talk it in every interaction. And I think on the highest level, that's our aim. And of course, when we get there, when we're able to do that, there is no need to come back here. And then we may come back in service or as a choice or whatever.
Yeah.
But based on all my experience, both my own journeys and my clients' journeys, it's all about journeying into unconditional love and then bringing it back. Yeah.
What is a soul contract, and why would we make one?
Well, on the higher planes, so we've talked about how we access the superconscious, we access the never-ending now, we access universal consciousness. Kind of on the way there, if you like, there are points of individuation rather than separation. There are points of consciousness where we we choose to incarnate in a particular route. We choose to incarnate on this planet. And we also incarnate as groups. So that's where soul contracts come in, that you will incarnate those who are closest to you, your very best friends, your dearest family members, and sometimes people who come into your life for a very special purpose and leave again. Those are people you would have a soul contract with. And that's a positive thing, that you agree to help each other. So around us is a team of beings. I think for me, the old-fashioned term of referring to that team would be spirit guides, but there's much more to it than that. These discarnate beings have been traveling with you for a very long time. They love you unconditionally, and they vary in their own experience. So you would have spirit guides, you would have spiritual teachers, you would have ascended masters, and you might have angels, you might have all kinds of beings around you supporting you. In that team, also, some incarnate with you. To become consciously aware that you are incarnated with a member of your soul team who might also be a master is a pretty big deal, and it can happen now and again.
So what is a blueprint? Why do we have them?
Blueprint or life plan is something you plan with your team before you incarnate, and really it's a mud map. It's as if you, it's not a great analogy, but it's kind of as if you've been dropped behind enemy lines with a rough idea of how to return to source. It's like you've been dropped in a jungle with a rough idea of how to make your way out. Because the nature of the way we choose to incarnate here is that we very quickly forget. Unless you're one of a few very blessed people, we very quickly forget our whole soul's journey. So it seems like it's all new.
Yeah.
And part of the joy of living on this planet is rediscovering that. So your blueprint or life plan, you can access through crystal dreaming and bring yourself back into alignment with it, or make minor changes that will enable that to flow more easily. And your blueprint or life plan is always about service to unconditional love.
Okay.
It's always about service to humanity. It's never, ever about ego.
Right.
So we all have one, but it's very easy to lose them, drop the mud map in the mud, or not even know you've got a mud map.
Yeah.
So a blueprint or life plan isn't like you will go A, B, C, D. It's like you will go, most probably go here, you'll most probably go there. You may choose not to. You may get distracted, but really you're heading in this direction, that direction. And your spiritual team will never interfere without being asked and being given permission to interfere, to engage, let's say, rather than interfere.
But they are there if you want to ask them.
Ready, willing, and able.
Yeah, it's just that remembering that they're there and asking
and giving permission, because the ethics of that part of the spiritual world is not to interfere without permission. So you can ask your team for advice, but you can actually ask for more than that. But they won't engage with, because they respect your free will, they're not really going to engage on your behalf.
So Raym, how can trauma that we don't even remember from past lives affect us in this life?
Well, the traumas, we hold the trauma on a cellular level, but really most of the time it's affecting our emotional body.
Right.
So from a shamanic perspective, trauma will repeat over lifetimes until it's cleared, and your body is inviting you to pay attention to where the trauma's held. So the trauma can affect you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And it's not unusual in this work to have a client come to you who shares that they've had, say, repeated traumas in a knee. They've had a cut, they've scalded the knee, the child has bruised them in the knee. And that's the body's way of saying, here, here's the trauma. Please pay attention. please release me before I manifest physically as disease or something out of balance. So if we don't release trauma, it can affect us eventually, affect us physically.
Karma, what is it and how do we avoid it?
Can't avoid it. Karma is incurred when you deliberately harm another being. And karma is played out by you experiencing what you perpetrated. And it's absolutely unavoidable. It can't be negotiated out of. You can maybe negotiate an easier settlement, an easier experience of what you perpetrated. So karma is not incurred if you have an accident and hurt someone. Right. So if you were driving a car and you were distracted through no fault of your own, or someone drove into you and they were hurt, that does not incur karma. However, if you were driving a car and you were pissed or on drugs, that does incur karma because right. you did not take responsibility. Right. So in a way, that becomes a deliberate act. Karma, when I became aware of karma, I became a lot more careful about how I spoke. Because one of the things we see in this work is that our words have incredible power.
Yes.
And in a way, in their own way, they can affect karma. You can hurt somebody deeply by saying something randomly that you might think is funny or sarcastic or witty, but it can actually cut to the chase and hurt them. So that's just words. If we move into actions, then if we go back through the ages and you have perpetrated torture or abuse, guess what? You're going to experience that. However, if somebody's experienced abuse in this life, it's not remotely appropriate to say that that's karma playing out.
Yes.
I sometimes see that in spiritual groups, and it's so inappropriate because there's so many other reasons why trauma might happen. That is one of them. And sometimes when we look into it, indeed, that's the case. It's playing out of karma. And in which case, it's a great release for the client.
Right.
Things make sense. Okay, now it's done. Now I've been through that.
Thank you. And thanks for mentioning that it's not always good to say that.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's so true. So how is it that crystals work to awaken our spirituality? We know you had that profound experience with the green obsidian. How are the crystals awakening us?
Well, again, this could be a really long response, but the short and most truthful response is that they're interdimensional tools or bridges. If you arrange them in particular patterns, they can trigger different things for us on this plane. So that's really how I look at them. They are an interdimensional tool. If you're in an expanded state of consciousness, crystals will appear through many dimensions, if you understand what I mean. Some things become invisible in the higher dimensions, crystals don't. Some things cease to have relevance or become immaterial, crystals don't. So I think that's one of the reasons they're an interdimensional tool. And that's how we use them.
That's really interesting. Raym, what is an entity and why do we have them?
An entity is a catch-all phrase that encapsulates and covers a range of beings that are self-aware and definitely not unconditionally loving. Yeah. So these separate consciousnesses, which are most often earthbound spirits, dead people who have got confused, we come across them in our work because they attach to clients and can interfere with their life, even if they don't mean to, even if they're well-meaning. Most common entities, as I've said, are dead people, but then there's a whole range of beings apart from that includes interdimensionals, extraterrestrials, demonic forces, dark forces, the kind of thing people read about and get very frightened about. So we deal with them as compassionately as we can. Entities generally are attached through trauma. So one of the questions we ask a client in our very brief interview before the process is, have you experienced any trauma in this life? If a client has become very fearful in a situation, a non-loving entity will take the opportunity to attach to them by telling them they can ease the pain, ease the fear, which they can do. But then that's a contract. A contract's been entered into there where the entity can remain with the client as long as it likes and reattach to the client over subsequent incarnations. Right. So we can have entities that agreements were made thousands of years ago, or on another timeline, in a parallel reality, in another reality, in another universe, as another being. Wow. Right? So our job as crystal dreaming practitioners is to, as gently as we can, release the entity from the client through helping the entity understand that the contract or agreement is complete and it no longer has permission to stay with the client.
How can we protect ourselves from picking up things like entities? What kind of spiritual hygiene practices can we do when we're working in this arena?
Well, the first thing is laugh a lot, have a lot of fun. Negative entities do not like joy. It's repulsive to them. Neither do they like unconditional love. That's also repulsive to them. So the simplest exercise is to take yourself to a still place and draw in light through the crown chakra, open a many-petal flower on the crown. Let your body fill with light. Let that light expand and create an egg around you. And then draw light in through the crown. Open the heart chakra, pink flower in the center of the chest, and breathe out unconditional love and let that surround you in that egg. And then have yourself licked by a violet flame 3 times and the egg licked by a violet flame 3 times, and then put a gold and a platinum mesh on the outside of the egg. And you can say then, I am light, I am love, I am protected.
Right.
That's a good twice daily practice. And it's on the Crystal Dreaming website.
Okay.
crystaldreaming.com.
You can put a link to that.
Yeah. And it's step 1 in terms of spiritual hygiene. Actually it's step 2, because step 1 should be receiving a crystal dreaming and clearing, making sure that you're clear of all attachments, entities, and trauma. And yes, it's a bit like an onion. It's many layered, but we can get through a lot in one session to the point where there would be no interference. And then that's your daily exercise, to surround yourself with unconditional love, which, as I've said, is repulsive to energies that aren't aligned to it. And that's the best and most foolproof protection. You may wear crystals. Lapis is also cleansed lapis, worn around the throat. Sandalwood on the nape of the neck. There are other practices, but the most foolproof one is to take responsibility and cleanse your own energy system. Really, laughter, joy, fun creates a repulsive space for beings that don't love you unconditionally. In crystal dreaming, we will allow a little interaction when we're not sure, but really it becomes pretty apparent very quickly if beings don't love you unconditionally. If they don't love a client unconditionally, they have an agenda. If they're obviously not aggressive and seem friendly, it'll be pretty obvious that they have an agenda, but which implies not unconditional love, it's conditional.
So how does an entity get earthbound?
Usually through trauma. When we die, we're met by a range of beings who love them unconditionally, including ancestors. Those beings will invite you to go with them to return to the source of all light, the source of all love, and that's fluid, spontaneous, and happens for most people. However, if you die in a traumatic situation, you can refuse that help. And the ethics in that part of the spirit world is to not intercede, to respect your free will. So if you refuse that help, through trauma or through a desire to remain on Earth because you're having so much fun here. You've been partying all your life and you don't want that to stop, so you're not going to leave the planet. That earthbound spirit will then look for another party animal to attach to so that they can experience vicariously through the emotional body what they have experienced. I mean, in simple terms, somebody can die and attach to someone. They can attach to them through creating contract in a dream. They can attach to them through the client's own trauma. It's a choice thing. Yes, they could be confused enough to miss the opportunity, but the team will really be quite present for them. Then there may be other reasons why they're choosing.
Right, they miss that.
Yeah.
Raym, where do the entities go?
So the aim in crystal dreaming is for any self-aware being to be guided home to unity consciousness, unconditional love by their own spiritual team. So providing a being is willing, and we really need their consent, otherwise we're engaging in karma, we're interfering. So providing a being is willing, we will invite the beings who love them unconditionally 3 times to come and join us and escort them safely home to light, safely home to unity consciousness, to the source of all light, the source of all love. And really in this process, I'd say 99% of beings will go there. However, we must respect free will, or we could be interfering in something, a bigger story that we're not aware of, and therefore creating our own karmic implications through, if you like, our arrogance. We know better. We think you should go home to light, which is why we always ask permission. And that can take a little negotiation. But that's the aim. Most of the time it happens. If a being is so confused, so angry, that it refuses that after, 10, 20 minutes of persistent negotiation, then the ethics with this practice is, okay, you can't stay with this client anymore. You can't return without their conscious written permission. And that is the best we can do in being fair to all beings. Well, I personally, I'm not mad about is that being will go out and look for somewhere else to attach. Yeah. But that's rare. I'd say in the thousands of sessions I've done, maybe half a dozen times. Yeah.
And when they're releasing it, where is it going?
We ensure that's a good question. It really is. We ensure it's escorted safely home to light. Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's not just left on the floor.
Because there is so many shamanic processes where the clearing is cleared from the person, but there's nothing that's completed for whatever was cleared. Whereas what I love about crystal dreaming is that where it's cleared and it's sent to the light. It's not just cleared from the person and still earthbound and wandering around or whatever.
All right, particularly with sentient beings. Also, there are some processes that I know that just observe. So we can do so much more. We have the innate ability to do so much more than just observe. We can release. And we can release with equilibrium. We can release with joy. Now, when we talk about transiting home to light, we're talking about returning to the source of all love, the source of all light. We're talking about returning to the superconscious oneness, bliss, which is where our higher selves reside. And really the aim of every crystal dreaming session is to connect a client with their I am presence or their higher self. Right. If a client can connect with that, any challenges they have on this plane become utterly insignificant and surmountable.
Beautiful. That's really magical. So what is free will?
Well, it's your choice to do as you choose, to whoever you choose, wherever you choose. The catch with free will is that there are always consequences to your actions. And in other regions of the universe, there isn't free will. There is group consciousness. So to come here and experience free will is a big deal. There's a queue of beings wanting to be here for that reason. that we're not always incarnated in a free will zone.
So what is channeling when people talk about they've channeled in information from the spirit realm or another dimension?
You can see by my reaction, I'm quite wary of channeling. Yes, in its truest form, channeling is when a human being hands over all bodily functions to another being. So, given that, I would say proceed with caution. And what appears to be channeling can actually be mediumship. So mediumship is when you will dialogue with a discarnate being and you'll basically speak for them. So, it might start like, well, Uncle Joe says this, this, and this, and eventually it turns into the person just being a telephone line for Uncle Joe. That's not channeling, that's mediumship. But the same technique can be applied if you're channeling an ascended being. Okay, for the sake of argument, the Lady Isis says that, and then next thing, there's no she says, it's just saying. That's still mediumship. And that's still going through the consciousness of the medium. And that is affected by the consciousness of the medium. It's affected by the medium's life story. It's affected by the medium's cosmic story. Channeling is where, with the correct training and very careful spiritual hygiene protocols, an ascended being, like the Lady Isis, for example, takes full control of the body. And that means a change in body temperature, a change in pulse, a change in breathing, a change in voice, change in demeanor. That's channeling. And as someone who deals a lot with entities, I would say to anyone considering channeling, please proceed with caution. Use every protocol you can to ensure that the being that you're channeling is who they say they are and that they love you unconditionally. So I'm not a huge fan of channeling.
What is it that we are ultimately trying to access? The bliss state or an awakened consciousness?
Awakened consciousness is a step towards experiencing bliss. In order to experience bliss through crystal dreaming, you need to be free of all trauma and attachments. If you have an entity that's attached to you, it's very, very threatened by you empowering yourself by accessing bliss, so it will do everything it can to stop the process, which is a large part of the training is about dealing with entities trying to stop the process, which is normal and it's understandable. So by accessing bliss, we become empowered, and by accessing bliss, we authentically experience the superconscious. So this process is very good at opening that. It does involve clearing beforehand. By accessing bliss, we become very empowered, because in that state, we are at peace with everything, and we understand what has brought us to that point. So a key part of the crystal dreaming process is to take a client to bliss, because in that point is a point of power and a point of accessing unity consciousness.
Do you think as humans that's how we are meant to vibrate? Is that the ultimate, that we all should be just walking around?
I think the whole planet should be vibrating like that. And indeed, a lot of other beings do vibrate at that level. But I think our species has got quite egocentric and lost touch with the fact that, our grandchildren own the planet.
Yes.
Our role is to nurture and look after the planet for them, rather than see it as a resource that can be used. It's a very different mindset that this is here. Let's say that God left all these minerals and resources for me to use to make me rich, rather than the planet is abundant. How can I cooperate with the planet to live well and nurture the planet for future generations? They're two quite different mindsets, and one would be associated more with a culture that's living in nature, and the other is the westernized culture that is frequently totally cut off from nature.
That understanding that we are simply the custodians for future generations.
We are, and it's such a lovely planet.
I'm not sure we're doing such a good job at that at the moment. What is life like to be a 21st century shaman?
Life as a 21st century shaman is a bit like traveling incognito because we don't have a village where people really understand what we do. I mean, I'm blessed to an extent in the Byron Bay region where people do understand what I do, but even then, I'm on the fringe in that area, and I'm in a not quite sure where it fits in thing, and that's as it should be. I don't know where the shaman should be fitting in. I think we're meant to be on the fringe. We're meant to be pushing the envelope, and possibly a bit of a solitary practice, but that's all right because we can connect with clients and people. So life as a 21st century shaman is an adventure, and it's maybe not quite what people might imagine it to be. It's full of challenges as well, but a lot of joy. A lot of joy.
So what made you come up with the term crystal dreaming? Why the dreaming? Obviously the crystal?
Well, it is a gentle nod to the existing culture here, but also we do enter an expanded dreamlike state. But we're very cognizant in that state. So it was two things happening really. Interdimensional crystal journeys, a bit of a mouthful, and that just kept resonating with me. It is showing respect to the existing culture here, but it's also referring to the kind of lucid dreaming state that we enter into. We're not in a normal state of consciousness in crystal dreaming, and as a practitioner, our skill is keeping the client talking, because if we don't keep the client talking, they won't remember. As you're well aware, they won't remember, even on your own journeys. They won't remember what happened because they're in such a deeply expanded state of consciousness. So that's why it ended up being crystal dreaming. The name just kept coming back all the time.
What is cellular memory?
Well, our bodies hold on to everything. It's stored in our cells. It's stored in our DNA. All of our experiences across all time, space, in all realities, in all dimensions, are here now in this body. So we can unlock it. It's really, really easy. And the body wants to share it. So in unlocking a cellular memory, we can visit any time and place where we have existed, our consciousness has existed. So it tends to be perceived in a stream of consciousness like a line of incarnation, a route of incarnation, but actually we've all been everything. So we can access anything if we choose. It seems to be most productive to really access what relates to this soul's journey.
Right.
So the catch-all with that is when we access the superconscious, we are everything. But in terms of cellular memory, we are tending to access and release what's affecting us here and now.
Okay.
Or the plus side is we can go into fun things. We can access when you did amazing things where there was no trauma, where you were an amazing person who contributed a great deal to their community.
So how do we understand the multiverse? What exactly is the multiverse?
Okay, so let's say that there are multiple pathways from any moment.
Okay.
That we are happily in this pathway here and now, and our consciousness feels like it's here and now. But actually, when we elevate the consciousness and expand it, the consciousness is everywhere all the time. So that would be my understanding of the multiverse, that without getting too into many, many stories and possibilities, from this point in our consciousness, if we opt into crystal dreaming, if we opt into allowing our consciousness to expand in a safe place, then we can access the superconscious consciously. In accessing the superconsciousness, we access all time space,
Yes.
all realities, and we actually end up in a never-ending now. Right. So everything comes to that still point. And from that still point, where your higher self exists in a state of absolute bliss, from that still point, you can navigate, you can unravel anything that is holding you back on this plane, and in fact holding you back on many other planes. But this plane is our pathway to it. Right. And it's affecting this body here and now. But when we go into it, we can find out that it has many repercussions. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Beyond just this universe.
Beyond just this timeline, this universe, this reality. But it can be a bit overwhelming to go there, which is why it's hard for me to speak about. It's like speaking about infinity. Yeah. Because we appear to live a finite existence here, which we don't. But of course, we're locked into this timeline, the way our bodies break down and the way we come in and leave our bodies. Mm-hmm. So we're a bit, this is the way it is, but of course it isn't, there's much more. Yeah. And once you access that, and once your client access that, everything can change in their life dramatically.
So what do you think is happening to someone's brain in the shamanic state? What opens up to make it a shamanic state?
Well, I think there are levels of consciousness that, particularly in Western culture, we shut down, that are opened. And I think part of what's happening is that the ego part of the brain is told to step aside, and it does step aside eventually. Sometimes it resists the journey because it realizes it's not controlling, it's not writing the journey. So I'm not really a brain expert, but in terms of consciousness, I would be saying that our consciousness is quite focused like this in this reality, and suddenly it goes, and it keeps going. In fact, you know, in connecting with the higher self, the key question we ask clients is, how far does your consciousness reach? And the answer is, wow. It extends across all time and space. I'm touching everything.
Infinity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Raym, for taking the time to answer our questions today.
My pleasure.
Well, I'm Rachel Hanrahan, and this has been Raym Richards. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us.